night my father-in-law told me I was no longer needed at the company, I was sitting 3 desks away from the contract that had my signature on it. He didn't even look me in the eye when he said it. He just slid a folder across the conference table, folded his hands the way he always did when he thought he was being reasonable, and said, "We think it's time to restructure. Family businesses go through these transitions." My husband sat to his left. He nodded once, slowly, like it had been rehearsed. "My name is Meredith. I'm 31 years old. I spent 4 years quietly holding together a construction supply company that was 6 weeks from bankruptcy when I married into it. They didn't know that the person they just let go was also the person legally tied to 40% of everything they owned. I should back up. When I met my husband Gordon at a project management conference in Denver, he was charming in that low-key, self-deprecating way that I now recognize as a rehearsed trait rather than an honest one. He talked about his family's business like it was a legacy, something built over decades with integrity. His father, Edmund, had started it in the 90s, commercial construction materials, supplying contractors across the mid-Atlantic. Gordon was being groomed to take over, he said. He just needed a little help stabilizing things first. I was 26 and in love, and I had a very specific set of skills that made me, in retrospect, an extremely useful person to marry. I had a master's degree in finance, 7 years of operational consulting experience. I'd turned around 2 failing regional businesses before I was 25. I didn't advertise that at dinner parties. I've always been the kind of person who does the work and lets the results speak. We got married 14 months after we met. Small ceremony, his family's house in suburban Maryland. His mother, Constance, held my hands at the reception and told me I was exactly what this family needed. I believed her. I thought she meant it as a compliment about who I was as a person. She meant it as a job description. Within 6 months of our wedding, I was doing the books, not officially, not with a title. Just helping out, Gordon said. Just getting familiar with things. His father's original accountant had retired and the replacement wasn't catching things the way she should. I sat down with the financials for what I thought would be a weekend and spent 3 weeks untangling what I found. The company wasn't just struggling, it was hemorrhaging. Accounts receivable hadn't been properly managed in 2 years. 3 major contractor clients were 60 to 90 days past due, and no one had followed up. There were vendor contracts auto-renewing at above-market rates because no one had renegotiated them. And there was a line of credit at 9.4% interest that could have been refinanced 18 months ago and wasn't. I fixed it, quietly, completely. I restructured the vendor agreements, collected on outstanding receivables, refinanced the line of credit at 5.8, and built a cash flow model that gave them visibility 6 months out. I didn't ask for anything. Gordon thanked me with flowers and a really nice dinner in Georgetown, and his father shook my hand and said I had a good head on my shoulders. That was the first time I understood what I was to them. I was useful. I was quiet. And I had no idea what I was worth to them because no one ever said it out loud. Over the next 3 years, it escalated in a way I didn't notice because it happened so gradually. I started attending vendor meetings, then leading them. I started reviewing contracts, then drafting them. When Gordon's younger brother Philip joined the company, I trained him. When Edmund wanted to expand into Virginia, I wrote the business plan. When they nearly lost their largest commercial account because of a delivery dispute, I flew to Pittsburgh and handled it personally. My official title was never updated. On paper, I was a consultant listed under a vague line item in the operating agreement. Edmund handled it that way for tax efficiency, he said. It made sense at the time, he said. There would be time to formalize things later. There is always time to formalize things later, until there isn't. The shift happened around month 30 of our marriage. It was small things at first, decisions being made without looping me in, meetings I used to be included in that now happened before I arrived. Gordon coming home already knowing things I hadn't heard yet. His mother, Constance, started calling the company the boys' business in that offhand way that wasn't offhand at all. When I pointed out once that I'd been the one to negotiate the Virginia expansion, she smiled and said, "Of course, you've been such a wonderful support to Gordon." Support. Not partner, not architect, support. I should have seen it sooner, but I loved my husband. Or I loved the version of him I constructed in my head, the one who saw me clearly, who knew what I contributed. I kept believing that version existed somewhere underneath the version, who said nothing when his father interrupted me in meetings. The final year was the worst, and I still walked through it with my eyes half closed. Edmund brought in a business development consultant named Harrison from outside the family. Harrison was 38, very confident, not particularly sharp, and made the same recommendations I had made 8 months earlier in a memo no one responded to. Edmund treated those recommendations like revelation. He had Harrison present to the board while I sat in the back of the room, watching my own analysis get credited to someone else in real time. I went home that night and sat in my car in the driveway for 22 minutes. I didn't cry. I just sat there and let something settle. Then I went inside and made dinner and didn't say a word about it. 3 weeks later, Edmund called a family meeting. Those meetings were never good. He sat at the head of the kitchen table at their house in Bethesda, Constance beside him, Gordon and Philip across from me. He talked about the company growing in a new direction. He talked about streamlining leadership. He talked about wanting to keep things in the family, meaning by blood, and he said it without flinching. He looked at me finally and said, "We're going to restructure your consulting role. We think it's a clean break, better for everyone." Gordon put his hand over mine on the table. I still don't know if that was affection or restraint. I asked 2 questions. I asked what the timeline was. Edmund said 60 days. I asked if there was a severance structure. He looked surprised, like the idea that I might expect something in return hadn't fully occurred to him. He said they'd put together something fair. I said okay. That was Tuesday. By Thursday morning, I had called my attorney. She's methodical and clear-eyed, and she doesn't waste words. I laid out everything over 2 hours. The consulting structure, the operating agreement, the fact that 3 specific renovation and capital expenditure projects had been executed under my name for liability and tax purposes because Edmund had suggested it and I had signed without fully understanding the long-term implications. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Meredith, have you read your operating agreement recently?" I hadn't, not in 2 years. She walked me through it. When I was brought on as a named consultant in the operating agreement 4 years ago, the language was broad enough that combined with the capital projects in my name, I had what she described as a colorable claim to a meaningful equity interest in the company. Not 40%, that was my rough mental estimate. She put it closer to 22 to 28%, depending on how a court valued the contributions. But still, in a company with the revenue profile they now had, because of work I had done, that number had weight. I drove home very slowly. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and looked out at the backyard and breathed. Then I called my CPA. Then I called my previous consulting clients, 2 of whom had been trying to bring me back for over a year. I told them I was available. I did not call Gordon. The next 60 days looked normal from the outside. I kept showing up. I kept doing my work. I was, if anything, slightly more meticulous than usual. I documented everything. Every decision I had been part of, every contract I had touched, every email chain where my analysis had shaped an outcome. I organized it the way I organize everything, chronologically, tabbed, referenced. 4 years of contribution compressed into files that told a very clear story. On the 43rd day, I found somewhere to live. I'd been looking quietly. I wanted something that was entirely mine, not a rental in a neighborhood Gordon had opinions about, or an apartment close to his family's house because it was convenient. I found a 2-bedroom condo in Falls Church with a decent commute, and good light in the morning, and no associations with anything that had happened in the last 4 years. I signed the lease on a Thursday. I didn't tell anyone. On day 55, I moved out. Gordon came home to find me finishing the last box. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom looking at the bare dresser and the stripped nightstand, and I watched him try to find the version of events where this wasn't happening. "What are you doing?" he said. It wasn't really a question. I told him I was moving out. He said I had 5 more days. I told him I didn't need them. He followed me downstairs. He watched me load the last of my things into my car. He asked why I was taking the bookshelf. I told him I'd bought it. He asked about the dining table. I told him I'd bought that too, along with the reading chair and the standing lamp and the coffee maker he used every single morning without once asking where it came from. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't think you'd actually leave." I looked at him, the man I had married, the man who had held my hand at that kitchen table when his father told me I was being cut out. And I thought about all the versions of him I had loved and discarded over 4 years, looking for the one who would eventually show up and be honest with me. I know, I said. That's why I planned it myself. I drove away without looking back. I'm not being dramatic when I say that. I genuinely did not look in the rearview mirror. That night, I ordered Thai food and ate it sitting on the floor of my new condo because I didn't have furniture yet. It was 9:30 on a Wednesday. I had a glass of wine and my laptop and a view of the parking lot. It was the first night in a long time that nothing was required of me. I slept for 9 hours. The next morning, I made coffee in a borrowed French press and called my attorney again. We talked for 40 minutes. She had sent a formal letter to Edmund the previous day, on my instruction, outlining my equity position and requesting either a negotiated buyout or a formal valuation process. The letter was polite, it was professional, it referenced specific clauses in the operating agreement and specific capital projects, and it asked for a response within 21 days. Edmund called Gordon before he called his own lawyer. I know this because Gordon called me 4 times before noon. I didn't answer until the 4th call. He said his father was upset. I said I understood. He said the letter felt aggressive. I said it was accurate. He said they had always planned to do right by me. I said I knew what right by me looked like, and a 60-day exit without severance after 4 years of undocumented contribution wasn't it. He was quiet. Then he said, "Mom thinks you're doing this out of spite." I thought about Constance calling the company the boys' business. I thought about her face at their kitchen table when Edmund had delivered his verdict, and how she had looked not uncomfortable but satisfied, like something had been returned to its proper place. "Your mother can think whatever she wants," I said. "My attorney will be in touch." I hung up and went back to my coffee. The 21 days passed. Edmund's attorney sent a response that was, charitably, an attempt to minimize. They disputed the equity interpretation. They cited the informal nature of my role. They suggested my contributions were better characterized as marital support than professional service. Marital support. My attorney sent back a 40-page document with exhibit tabs. I won't walk through all of it. The version that matters is this. 3 months after Edmund told me I was being restructured out of a company I'd rebuilt from near collapse, we reached a settlement. The number was not what I had originally calculated in my head. It was higher. Because once my attorney pulled the full revenue comparison between year 1 of my involvement and year 4, and put that next to the compensation I had never formally received, the math became very hard to argue with. Edmund never apologized. I didn't expect him to. Gordon sent me a text 2 weeks after the settlement was signed. It said, "I didn't understand how much you were carrying." I read it twice. I thought about responding. I wrote 3 different drafts in my head. Then I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to work. Philip called once out of nowhere, about a month later. He said things had changed at the company without me there, that Harrison's ideas weren't working out the way Edmund hoped, that they were having to redo some of the vendor contracts because whoever renegotiated them the second time hadn't known what they were doing. I listened to all of it, then I said, "I hope they figure it out," and ended the call. I meant it. I genuinely did. I had spent enough years thinking about that company, and I had very little interest in what happened to it now. What I was interested in was the consulting practice I was building. 2 clients on retainer by the end of month 2, 4 by month 5. By the end of the year, I had a small team and a wait list and a revenue number that would have made Edmund's eyes water. I went back to Denver once, for a conference, the same one where I'd met Gordon 4 years earlier. I walked through the same hotel lobby and felt almost nothing. Not grief, not nostalgia, just a kind of mild curiosity at how a place can hold such different meaning, depending on who you were when you stood in it. I had dinner by myself that night at the hotel restaurant. Ordered something I would never have ordered when I was trying to be low maintenance. Tipped 30%. Sat at the table for 2 hours reading a book I'd been meaning to get to. The server asked if I was waiting for someone. I said no. He said, "Enjoy yourself then." I said I intended to. I don't think about Edmund much anymore. Or Constance and her small, satisfied smile, or the conference room where I watched someone else get credit for my work and drove home and sat in my car in the dark. I think about the version of me who used to fold herself smaller so she'd fit more easily into rooms where she was never really welcome. She was very good at it. She was efficient and quiet, and she never asked for anything directly. She also didn't know what she was worth. until someone tried to take it from her. I know now. I keep the number in a document saved to two different places, not because I need to see it every day, just because it's good to know exactly where you stand when someone tells you that you aren't standing anywhere at all. The company sold 18 months later. Edmund didn't announce it publicly. I heard through a contractor I knew from the Pittsburgh account. They sold to a regional competitor for a number that was, by most measures, reasonable. It would have been higher if I'd still been there. Everybody who needed to know that already did. I still think about that conference room sometimes, not with anger. More like you'd think about a scar after it's healed. You run your finger over it and remember what happened, but you don't flinch anymore. What I've come to understand is that nothing about what happened to me was accidental. Not the good parts, and not the painful ones either. Edmund didn't build a trap. He just created a set of conditions, and I walked into them because I hadn't yet learned to read what people show you versus what they tell you. That's on me as much as it's on him. I was so focused on the work that I stopped paying attention to the structure around the work. I assumed that doing the right thing, quietly, consistently, would eventually be recognized and rewarded. It's a reasonable assumption. It's also, sometimes, exactly wrong. The thing nobody warns you about when you're good at what you do is that your competence can become someone else's convenience. I kept the lights on. I kept the vendors happy. I flew to Pittsburgh and saved an account that would have taken the company down if it had walked. And because I did all of that without complaint, without negotiation, without ever sitting down and saying, this is what I'm worth and this is what I expect in return, I accidentally taught the people around me that I didn't require those things, that I would just keep going, that I was infrastructure. I don't say that to assign blame anymore. I say it because it's the most useful thing I learned from 4 years I could otherwise write off as a waste. There's a version of integrity that hurts you. It's the kind where you hold yourself to standards no one else in the room is holding. Where you do the honest thing, the thorough thing, the careful thing, and you expect the world to simply notice and respond in kind. I had that version for a long time. I'm not sure I'd call it a virtue. I'd call it naivety dressed up as principle. Real integrity, I've decided, includes knowing what you're owed. It includes documenting your contributions, understanding your legal position, and not signing things you haven't fully read. Edmund used language in that operating agreement that I treated as boilerplate. My attorney treated it as leverage. The difference between those two readings was about 4 years of me not paying close enough attention to my own interests. And then there's the matter of not giving up on yourself, even when the people who were supposed to see you couldn't be bothered to look. Gordon never defended me in that conference room. Constance smiled when I was cut out. Philip didn't say a word. I could have accepted that as evidence that I was the problem, that I'd overestimated my own value, that I should have been grateful for what I had. For about 3 days, I almost did. Then I called my attorney, then my CPA, then my former clients, one by one, methodically, without drama. That's the part I'm most proud of. Not the settlement number. Not the fact that the company sold for less after I left, though I'd be lying if I said I hadn't noticed. The part I'm most proud of is that when I had every reason to collapse or retaliate or do something I'd regret, I did none of those things. I sat at a kitchen table in an empty condo with a borrowed French press, and I made a plan. What I built after that didn't happen because things worked out. It happened because I stopped waiting for someone else to decide what I was worth and started operating like I already knew. I keep that number saved in 2 places, not as a trophy. As a reminder that clarity, when you're willing to sit with the uncomfortable version of it, is the most valuable thing you'll ever develop.